From feed-in tariffs to the spot market, self-consumption, PPAs, and the direct supply to power off-takers. Solar business models rarely stay still, and 2026 is another period of great change. Welcome to the Smartery podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Gifford. Low PV capture rates, the duck curve, or solar cannibalization, whatever you call it, it's a major challenge for our industry. And in short, it means that in mature solar marketplaces, when the sun shines, clean electrons are flooding our electricity network, and wholesale power prices collapse. For solar developers, this makes batteries essential and innovation in terms of business models equally crucial. My guest today has just shy of 20 years of experience in solar industry market intelligence, and she draws on that to make sense of this current period of market transition. Edurne Zoco is the Executive Director, Clean Technologies and Supply Chain for S&P Global, and she joins us in just a moment. And we'll get some insights into the Brazilian solar and energy storage market a little later, with a relatively freshly appointed chair of the Brazilian Solar Industry Association. Barbara Rubim is the president of AB Solar, and she shares her excitement about upcoming energy storage project auctions, which could breathe new life into the industry after a difficult period. If you're listening to or watching the Smartery podcast for the first time, please subscribe, follow, and leave a rating or review. Help us continue to grow awareness of our ever-changing industry. And as always, you can get in touch with us anytime at podcast@thesmartery.com. Here at the Smartery 2026, I'm joined by Edurne Zoco, the Executive Director, Clean Technologies and Supply Chain for S&P Global. Now, Edurne, it's been a tumultuous time in the solar industry.
Well, it's always.
Yeah, right. It's a kind of default setting. But we're actually seeing or expecting a decline year on year in the annual solar market, S&P Global's forecast. What kind of impacts do you expect that to have?
Well, actually, maybe I need to clarify that what we are expecting is a slowdown of solar installations this year. The reason is that installations in China are going to be declining because of changes in this market. But the good news is that actually installations in other parts of the world are going to be increasing about 25%. So in general, yes, an overall decline of installations. But if we look into the actual data, we can see that solar is still growing in many regions. And this is just a dip in 2026. We are expecting continued growth for the rest of the decade.
Okay, interesting. And potentially some of those other markets might be higher value markets or might be higher prices than China.
Yes, I mean, some of these markets, they might be higher value, but also these are markets where the penetration of solar is still lower. And this is very important because, as you know, in some markets, like in Spain and other markets, the penetration of solar has already created a lot of challenges around, cannibalization and lower prices. So we see this as an opportunity of solar to continue growing as long as the entire solar ecosystem grows with solar, with batteries and other technologies.
Well, that's it, the ecosystem now. That means battery energy storage systems. And we're seeing in countries like Spain, really low solar capture rates when it comes to the merit order of wholesale power prices. This is making batteries absolutely vital in many parts of Europe, but they are accelerating quickly.
Yes, exactly. So, yes, one of the reasons why the battery energy storage forecast has been increased is because in order for solar to continue growing, you need to be installing more batteries, either in retrofit or either in new installations or in front of the meter. But that's not the only reason why batteries are going to be increasing, because there is a big boom around behind the meter. And batteries are also going to be a big part, or they are going to have a central part of this story.
And I think this story for batteries, as you put it, has been one of really accelerating growth, right? Because when you compare it to the early days of solar installations, right? Think back 10, 15, even 20 years ago, solar really took a long time to build before it hit a kind of inflection point. It feels different with batteries. It feels like batteries are going faster.
So actually, if you look at the curve and the learning curve of batteries and solar, I mean, the shape is the same. It's just that batteries go a bit on steroids, right? They are just following the same shape, but just faster. So in terms of like cost declines, in terms of like installation. So we do expect batteries to continue growing. It is true that batteries into the storage market are just maybe like 15 to 20% of the entire demand for batteries, but still we are still anticipating a very strong growth from the storage segment and of course from electrification from the transport.
Okay, well, turning to solar markets, you mentioned that there is growth outside of kind of the big powerhouse markets that we've seen in the past, like China. Turning to Europe in particular, the big markets are Spain, Germany, Italy, maybe the UK. France is always kind of there and thereabouts. But we're seeing growth in kind of other parts of Europe as well.
Yes, I mean, we are seeing growth until now, a lot of the big growth on solar demand has been from utility segment, right? More and more we are seeing the growth, particularly in Europe, coming from behind the meter. That is residential and C&I. We see some markets like Switzerland and Italy and Austria that have very effective systems to develop C&I installations. But also we see an increasing interest for a lot of users around residential systems in the smaller countries in Europe. And we continue that. We expect that will be the case. When you think about the cost of installing a residential system are lower and lower, then the incentives to electrify your heat or your AC, we are suffering a heat wave now in Munich, so there are many interests to electrify your home and have, not only EV charging, but also like AC and heat pumps in winter. So that's one of the reasons why we see a residential system growing in Europe. The other is that we are facing again another energy crisis, not as big for Europe as the one in 22, where electricity prices really increased. But now we are also seeing that there is a lot of concern about, the consequences around inflation, around increased power prices because of the closing of the crisis in Hormuz, and a lot of users want to shield their electricity bills. We are seeing in Italy, for instance, at this moment, 80% of the power pricing hours are determined by gas prices. So I think for some companies, this is very good. For a majority of users, this is not something that people want. So this is going to be a big driver as well of residential systems.
Yeah, and when we look at forecasts for electricity market growth, e-mobility and data centers, they tend to be the two pillars. And it kind of makes sense that if you're a small business owner or a homeowner, that once you buy an EV, solar's a bit of a no-brainer, right? What about for supplying data centers and e-mobility more widely, like fleets and buses and these kind of things? How much of this demand can solar meet?
So we recently released a report about the use of batteries in data centers behind the meter. We have identified 5 base cases for the use of BESS in data centers. And I'm not going to be explaining here all the cases. One of them is, of course, optimization of your PPA. The other is like optimization of your gas installation. But the bottom line is that we are going to have a lot of batteries being installed, also because a lot of the power demand is going to come from hyperscalers or AI training data centers. And these data centers have very specific technical requirements, and of course you still need a UPS, but BESS are going to be like this system that kind of do the absorb shock, and it's going to be just to give you an idea, we have increased big time our BESS forecast for the next 10 years just because of BESS application into data centers.
Wow, that's really interesting. And that doesn't always have to be coupled with solar. That's often
of course not.
Standalone.
We are seeing, of course, there are a lot of challenges around grid and connecting. Of course, the preference of a data center is to be grid connected and as close as possible to the end user. But we are seeing that not always is possible. And so we are seeing a lot of behind the meter batteries with solar and wind and with like gas turbines or even gas engines trying to power these new data centers in Europe. We are seeing some examples of this right now being built in Spain.
Okay, well, let's turn to, just to round out our discussion, the kind of competitive landscape. It is a challenging time in the European marketplace. It is always kind of challenging in solar, right? But particularly recently, we've had oversupply for a number of years. What are your expectations in terms of how these kind of competitive dynamics will play out along the supply chain?
So, for the solar industry to be sustainable, companies need to be sustainable. So, in that sense, what we are seeing, and I was in China like 2-3 weeks ago attending a big show. What we are starting to see is something that I will call soft consolidation, where companies more and more kind of get integrated. They enter into other business that are, surrounding solar, like batteries, grid forming, EV charging, so trying to capture the entire value. So we are seeing more and more of these movements, also very interesting movements of like joint venture between like Asian companies, European companies. So on the company side, I think there is now a bigger understanding of what it is required to move to the next step. It's not only about reducing costs. Costs are not longer the biggest problem we have in solar to grow. Actually, it's probably the least of the problems. Right now, the biggest challenge is about how we innovate and how we create more understanding about how to better integrate renewables into the grid. And for that, also, my understanding or my beliefs is that policy is going to be a central part of this next stage.
Okay, well, it's kind of interesting then. We've come full circle, right? Because the market was kicked off by policy, the feed-in tariff here in Germany, and now you're saying policy is crucial for this next stage of growth.
Yes, because policy, the biggest issue with policy is there is not a policy that is better than others. The important is that when you play a game, you know what the rules are, right? As long as you know the rules, you can adapt to the game and find a way to make it. The current situation is that we have a lot of uncertainty, a lot of like draft, I'm talking now particularly about the case of Europe. So as soon as a lot of this uncertainty gets clarified, maybe after the summer, we will start seeing more actions and more movement within the industry.
Okay, it'll be an interesting time, no doubt. Edurne Zoco, the Executive Director, Clean Technologies and Supply Chain for S&P Global. Stay cool while you're in Munich these next few days. And thank you so much for joining
Thank you,
the
Jonathan.
Smartery podcast.
Always a pleasure.
The Smartery Europe is truly one of the most international events on the solar calendar, attracting attendees and exhibitors from all over the world. One of them is Barbara Rubim, who was recently elected chair of AB Solar, the Brazilian Solar Association. Barbara, thanks for joining the Smartery podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to talk about a bit of the exciting Brazilian context for solar.
Well, exciting, but also challenging, as I understand it. So Brazil went through a period of very rapid growth, expansion of its solar market. What's it facing today?
So basically, we are now at almost 70 gigawatts of solar installed in our matrix, positioning solar as the second biggest source of power in Brazil. 2/3 of this comes from distributed generation, 1/3 from centralized power plants. And that's something in which Brazil, it's quite different from other Latin American countries in which solar expansion was mostly through centralized generation. Right now, our main challenge, as I've heard throughout the conference in the Smartery, is in other countries, it's about grid flexibility and grid stability. So we are facing several curtailments. In 2025, 20% of all renewable generation in Brazil was curtailed. So of course, that's a loss. And we are trying to tackle this through storage and through other capacity auctions.
Okay, well, Brazil has other kind of natural attributes when it comes to a renewable energy system in terms of large amounts of hydropower. Why then is there the solar curtailment?
So that's actually a very good question. We used to say that Brazil, it's really well positioned for the energy transition because we have hydro, we have solar, we have wind, we have biomass. It's such a rich country in terms of natural resources. But what we are seeing right now is that we are having to curtail solar and wind because those generations in the middle of the day, especially between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m., are way bigger than our load. And that's also because of how much the sources grew in the past years, especially in the past 10 years, but also because we haven't seen that much load growth due to economic constraints in the past years. So we have this surplus of energy that needs to be curtailed for grid stability.
And where is battery energy storage installations in this environment? How much storage is installed?
So right now, there's actually kind of almost none. We have only 400 megawatt hours of storage in the country, which is really little. But the exciting news I think we have is that we have the first storage auction schedule. We have 2 dates. It's going to happen in 2nd of December and the 4th of December 2026. And we expect to have something between 2 gigawatt hour and 10 gigawatt hour of storage being hired in this auction. So something that it's likely going to boom the storage industry in our country.
Okay, you mentioned distributed generation. Is that primarily residential or is it also commercial systems as well?
It's both, but resi is still the biggest share of our market. So when we look towards distributed generation, we can say that in terms of installed capacity, it's like 50% is residential, and then followed by commercial, and then by rural consumers, and then industry.
Okay, and when you're in Brazil, it's not only about solar installations, it's also about manufacturing as well. Brazil has a long, proud tradition of domestic production.
Yeah.
What's the status there?
It's challenging as well, actually, but because usually industries are much driven also by auctions, energy auctions, because that gives industries the predictability of the demand they are going to have in the coming years. And we haven't seen new auctions for solar in quite some years, especially because of the curtailments that has been growing since 2023, I would say. So basically right now, the main industries that we have is some industries for inverters, such a fundamental part of the systems, and many industries also for the structure that we use to fixate modules. For modules itself, we have some kind of assembly happening in the country, but not, for example, cells production and things like that.
Okay, yeah, so the mounting structures
Yes.
in particular and trackers as well, I imagine.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay. Now, what about policy settings then? You mentioned the auctions. How do you feel solar is perceived by the administration in Brazil?
I think solar, as well as other natural resources such as wind, was always for some years stimulated. In the past years, we actually saw some kind of, I would say, decline in public policies for wind and solar in our segment. But what we do expect, and this is because, of course, of the curtailments, and there is quite some struggle. We do have a current administration that seems to be very much pro-gas and unlikely but true coal as well. So that's some pushbacks that we have been having in the renewable segment in the country. But we also do expect that once the storage starts to kick in terms of installations, several of this will also allow co-located systems or also new hybrid power plants with solar and wind.
And what about job creation then? I understand when there was the kind of utility scale boom, there are a lot of local jobs
Yes.
created. Is that recognized as being a feature of the solar market in Brazil?
Yes, definitely. The solar market has done, I think, two things for economy in general in the country. So the first is job creation. It's over 1 million jobs created by our industry alone. And also, it helps boom the local economy because unlike, for example, what we have in hydro or even what we have in some thermal power plants, even if renewables, Usually those power plants, because they are centralized, they are also very well centered in one place specifically. So for example, for thermal, usually south of Brazil, for hydro, north of Brazil. But solar, because our country has such good irradiation, allows us to have this kind of jobs being generated all within the countries, and especially in regions like Northeast or in some very poor regions of Brazil. So it really helped boost economic and social development.
And you've been here now in Munich for a few days for the Smartery. What are some of your takeaways? What are you going to take learnings from the floor or the conference sessions, take them back to the Brazilian industry and AB Solar?
I'm actually very excited because although AB Solar is a partner of the Smartery and Intersolar pretty much since our foundation, so that's 13 years now, that's actually my first time here at the Intersolar and the Smartery Europe. I think this was one of the better or the best high-level conferences that I have watched in terms of discussions and panels. We are right now in a very initial discussion in Brazil about DSOs, for example, so the distributed system operators. Brazil has a very different scenario from Europe. We only have one TSO, so one transmission system operator, which is ONS and operates the whole country. And we are very initial discussions about setting DSOs, for example. In Europe, it's so much ahead of us in that. And also in business models for storage, especially distributed storage, but also autonomous storage systems. I think those are the discussions I'm taking back home. And also the discussions I want to deep dive in this Smartery South America.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, an event to look forward to as well. One of the big focuses I've seen on the trade show floor, a lot of interest in e-mobility, right?
Yes.
We are in the second energy crisis this decade, pushing a lot of people to reconsider and getting an electric vehicle, and companies as well. As I understand it, Brazil has a really established kind of biofuels sector. What is happening with e-mobility in Brazil?
It's actually booming. It does face some challenges and some barriers because of the, let's say, business as usual automobility industry there. But we do see consumers embracing the EVs a lot. So for us to have an idea, in 2025, the most sold car in Brazil was an EV.
Wow.
And we're looking towards the same tendency in 2026 as well. And something that it's also pushing a lot of this demand, I can imagine that maybe the same might happen in Europe. It's the apps. So the share rides apps and etc.
Yeah.
So a lot of partnerships happening for those drivers to have EVs.
Okay.
And also something that it's very interesting, and again about social development, a lot of sayings and talks from, for example, just drivers telling how much shifting towards an EV has increased the revenue they get from driving because they spend much less money, much less money with fuels, for example.
And also maintenance as well.
Exactly.
Now, the upcoming auction in December, what's your understanding about how much interest there is in that auction from developers and EPCs?
I think there's a lot of interest, and also here during this Smartery, we have walked around several stands from the exhibitors, and many people come talk to us when they heard that we are from the solar industry. AB Solar also represents storage, to ask for what are the procedures, if it's already possible to file the projects. So I think this is gonna attract a lot of interest. It's important to say the market has been waiting for this auction for 5 years. So finally having a date and the rules set for it, it's almost giving me goosebumps actually.
I love that.
It's really important for us. And I think also talking about the manufacturing, I mentioned earlier that we have 2 dates for the auction. So the first date is only for the projects with local content.
Okay, wow.
So that not only It's something that supports the national industry, but it's also an opportunity for other companies to come and establish part of their productions in the country, because they would have time for that given when these battery power plants need to be developed.
Yeah, it's a very big development in the Brazilian marketplace to meet this challenge of low daytime prices. Barbara Rubim from AB Solar, thank you very much for joining the Smartery podcast. This podcast is a Climate Copy production. Nicole Schäfer is our producer and graphic designer, Ina Gossen, Wolfgang Weicht, and Peggy Herter-Zille from Solar Promotion, support on coordination and marketing. Klaus Schulte directed and edited this special series from Munich this year, and Martin Mostert and Timothy Cowan were our videographers. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you found us. If you're interested in the latest developments in solar energy storage and energy system integration, be sure to check out the Forum Solar Plus, taking place on the 24th to 25th of November in Berlin. Visit Forum Solar Plus website for details on registration and upcoming announcements. Get in touch with feedback, comments, or suggestions at podcast@thesmartery.com. I'm Jonathan Gifford, and thanks for joining me on another episode of the Smartery podcast.